The morning sun glinted off the surface of Willow Lake, but the water was no longer the clear, sparkling blue that had drawn Tom Grady to this quiet community years ago. Instead, a sickly green film coated the surface, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Tom stood at the end of the dock, his fishing pole dangling uselessly at his side, staring in disbelief at the hundreds of dead fish bobbing in the shallows. He'd seen the signs for days: fish gasping at the surface, birds avoiding the water, and a strange chemical tang in the air. But nothing prepared him for the devastation that greeted him this morning. He knelt down, scooping a lifeless base from the water, and shook his head in anger and sorrow. This lake had been his refuge, a place where he could escape the noise of the world, cast a line, and lose himself in the rhythm of nature. Now it was a graveyard. He turned to see the HOA president, Linda Hargrove, walking down the path in a blinding purple suit with a smug smile and a HOA violation notice in her hand as he stood and heard the gravel crunch behind him. "Well, Mr. Grady, I see you finally got the message," she called, waving the paper like a victory flag. "Fishing is out. The lake is dead." Tom stared at her, incredulous. "What did you do, Linda?" She shrugged, not even bothering to hide her satisfaction. "We had to take drastic measures. There are too many complaints about your fishing, including noise, trash, and disrupting the peace. The board voted to treat the lake with a special chemical. You are no longer allowed to fish here because it is perfectly legal." Tom's jaw clenched. "You poisoned the lake? You killed everything in it just to stop me from fishing?" Linda rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a lake. The community will be better off without your little hobby." Tom looked past her, noticing a police cruiser pulling up at the end of the road. With his arms folded, an officer stepped out to observe the situation. "You might want to think twice about that, Linda," Tom said, his voice low and steady. "You do realize that this lake supplies the community with water, right?" For the first time, Linda's confidence faltered. "What are you discussing?" Tom made a hand gesture toward the limp, green water. "The filtration plant draws from Willow Lake. You didn't just kill the fish. You contaminated the entire water supply. Every house, every garden, every glass of water in this neighborhood depends on this lake." Linda's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process the implications. The officer approached, glancing at the dead fish and the chemical sheen on the water. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Tom gave a nod. "Sure, officer. The HOA just poisoned the lake. I'd like to file a report for environmental damage and endangering public health." Linda sputtered. "This is ridiculous. I was just enforcing the rules." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, did you authorize the application of chemicals to the lake?" Linda hesitated, then nodded. "The board approved it. We have the paperwork." Tom gave a head shake. "You didn't consult the water authority. You didn't notify the residents. You just dumped poison in the lake to settle a personal grudge." The officer pulled out his notepad. "I'll need to see that paperwork, ma'am," she said, "and I'll be contacting the county environmental office." As Linda fumbled for her phone, Tom snapped a few photos of the devastation, already planning his next steps. He knew the local news would jump on a story like this, an HOA so obsessed with control that they'd poison their own water supply. Additionally, he was aware that the county would be forced to conduct an exhaustive investigation. As the officer took statements, neighbors began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the smell of rot. Some gasped at the sight of the dead fish. Others demanded answers from Linda, who was now visibly sweating. Tom explained what had happened, making sure everyone understood the consequences. "This isn't just about fishing," he said. "This is about our health, our homes, and the future of this community." By the time the news vans arrived, Linda was in tears. The officer was taping off the dock, and Tom was already on the phone with an environmental lawyer. He was prepared, despite the fact that he was aware that it would be a prolonged struggle. The lake might be dead for now, but he was determined to make sure the people responsible paid for their arrogance, and that Willow Lake would one day come back to life. The fallout was immediate and fierce. The story had gone viral on local news and social media by noon, with images of the algae-infested water and piles of dead fish appearing on every county screen. Reporters crowded the entrance to Willow Lake Estates, shoving microphones at anyone who would talk. Tom found himself at the center of a media storm, fielding questions from journalists and worried neighbors alike. He explained again and again how the HOA's reckless decision had poisoned not just the lake, but the very water that flowed into every home in the community. In hazmat suits, the county health department showed up, took water samples, and told people not to drink, bathe, or even water their gardens until further notice. Panic spread as people realized the full extent of the disaster. Bottled water disappeared from store shelves, and families scrambled to find somewhere safe to stay. Linda Hargrove, once the unchallenged queen of the HOA, was now a pariah. She tried to defend herself in front of the cameras, insisting that she'd only been trying to maintain order and that the chemical treatment was standard practice. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the public was in no mood for excuses. The official investigation was started by the County Environmental Office, and the State Attorney General's office said it would look into the HOA's actions for possible criminal charges. Tom, meanwhile, worked with his environmental lawyer to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of the entire community. The suit named Linda, the HOA board, and the chemical supplier, seeking damages for property loss, health risks, and emotional distress. The legal team quickly gathered statements from residents, representatives of the Water Authority, and even the manager of the filtration plant, who confirmed that the plant had been forced to shut down for good. The community's anger boiled over at the next emergency HOA meeting. Hundreds of residents packed the clubhouse, demanding answers and calling for Linda's resignation. Tom stood at the front of the room, holding up a jar of the toxic green water for all to see. This is what happens when a handful of people put their own petty grievances above the good community, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. You betrayed the trust we place in you to safeguard our homes. The board, under immense pressure, voted to suspend Linda and the other members who had approved the chemical treatment. A new interim board was elected on the spot, with Tom nominated as chair of the Environmental Recovery Committee. The next weeks were a blur of action. Tom worked with the county to secure emergency water deliveries, organized volunteer cleanups, and coordinated with environmental experts. He spent long days on the phone with lawyers, scientists, and reporters determined to hold the HOA accountable and restore the lake. The process was slow and painful. The water remained unsafe for months, and the stench of decay lingered long after the dead fish were removed. But as the community rallied together, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now worked side by side, planting native grasses along the shore, installing aerators, and monitoring water quality. The disaster had forced them to confront the consequences of unchecked authority, but had also given them a chance to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. Tom never lost sight of his objective, which was to bring Willow Lake back to life and ensure that no one forgot the hard lesson. As summer deepened, the scars of the disaster were still visible, but so was the determination of the community to heal. Tom became a fixture at the lake, clipboard in hand, working with biologists and volunteers to monitor the slow return of life to the water. The county brought in experts to test for lingering toxins, and every week, Tom posted updates on the community bulletin board. Water quality improving. Native fish restocking plan for fall. Please continue to use bottled water. The new HOA board, humbled by the crisis, met openly and often, inviting residents to participate in every decision. The days of secret meetings and arbitrary rules are long gone. Now, neighbors debated everything from water treatment options to shoreline restoration, and Tom's voice, once dismissed as that of a stubborn fisherman, carried real weight. The lawsuit moved forward, and the evidence against Linda and the old board piled up. Depositions revealed that, in order to make a point about order and property values, they had chosen the cheapest and most toxic chemical available and had ignored multiple warnings from the Water Authority. The chemical supplier faced its own investigation, and the State Attorney General's office brought charges of environmental negligence and reckless endangerment. Linda, who had once strutted through the neighborhood in bright suits and high heels, now avoided public places, her reputation in ruins. She tried to apologize, but few were willing to listen. The community's anger was still raw, but it was tempered by a new sense of solidarity. People who had never spoken before now shared rides to the nearest town for water, organized potlucks, and checked in on elderly neighbors. Tom found himself at the center of this new spirit, not as a hero, but as a neighbor who had refused to back down. He spent evenings on the dock, talking with kids about the importance of clean water and the delicate balance of the ecosystem. He helped organize educational workshops, inviting scientists to explain how lakes recover and why every resident had a role to play. Slowly, the lake began to change. The algae bloom receded and the water cleared. At dusk, the first frogs could be heard as dragonflies returned and skimmed the surface. When the county finally declared the water safe for limited use, the community celebrated with a lakeside picnic, the air filled with laughter and hope. Tom stood at the edge of the dock, watching children dip their toes in the water, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight wasn't over. The lawsuit was still in court, and the lake would take years to fully recover. But the worst was behind them. The disaster had revealed the dangers of unchecked authority, but it had also shown the power of a community united by a common cause. Tom was aware of the fact that Willow Lake would never be the same again, but he was also aware of the fact that they could improve it even more if they worked together. By the time autumn arrived, Willow Lake was no longer a symbol of disaster, but of resilience and renewal. The water, which had been overflowing with algae and death, now sparkled with the first signs of life. The county's environmental team, working closely with Tom and the new HOA board, began restocking the lake with native fish, carefully chosen to restore the delicate balance that had been lost. Children cheered as buckets of fingerlings were released into the water, their silvery bodies darting into the depths as the community gathered on the shore to watch. It was a moment of hope, a sign that the worst was truly behind them. The lawsuit reached its conclusion in late October. The court found Linda and the former board members liable for environmental negligence and reckless endangerment, ordering them to pay substantial damages to the community and fund ongoing restoration efforts. The chemical supplier was fined and banned from doing business in the state. The settlement money was used to upgrade the water filtration plant, install new safety systems, and create an emergency fund for future crises. Tom, though offered a seat on the permanent HOA board, declined, preferring to remain an advisor and neighbor rather than politician. He continued to lead the environmental committee, putting together activities for kids like cleanups, educational events, and fishing derbies. The lake became a gathering place once more, a source of pride and connection for everyone who lived nearby. Linda, disgraced and isolated, eventually moved away, her house sold quietly to a young family eager to join a community that had learned the hard way how to stand together. The story of the poison lake became a cautionary tale, retold at block parties and in local schools. A reminder that power must be checked, that nature is not to be trifled with, and that the health of the community depends on the wisdom and courage of its people. Tom sat at the end of the dock in November, fishing with his pole in hand, and watched the sun set over the water. As he reeled in a small, healthy bass, his first catch since the disaster, he quietly felt satisfied. He released it gently, watching it disappear into the clear water, and smiled. The lake had survived, and so had the community. They had faced arrogance, ignorance, and loss, but they had come through stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. As the stars appeared overhead, Tom packed up his gear and walked home, grateful for the second chance they'd all been given. The spirit of those who had made Willow Lake their home was also reborn,